all of you to the School Quality Task Force first virtual session. It is good to have all of you here. As you guys know, I'm Julie Mergel, and joining me today, helping with a facilitation of our presentations are Tristan Loveridge. Tristan, you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I did have one quick housekeeping thing to go over with you guys. I think I've only received 3 of the reimbursement forms from you. So if you can email those to me, I will continue getting them rolling.
Thank you, Tristan, for helping us with all of our housekeeping items. Also joining us and facilitating our partners from the Comp Center. And so, Eric, good morning to you.
Good morning to you as well. Happy to be here and see you all again. I think my colleague Jacob, who I think some of you know or have worked with in previous capacities, will be observing with us today. And Julie, I'll be driving your slides for you for at least this first part.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. So glad to have you. Tristan, would you go ahead then and do roll call and so that we can check attendance of all of our task force members?
Definitely. I always like to ask a little question. So let's see. Let's ask what your Valentine's Day plans are. And I'm going to start with Janelle Beers.
Good morning. I don't know if I have any Valentine's Day plans, but probably we will go out to dinner and, trade some Valentine goodies, flowers or candy or something.
Awesome. Next is Gail Venturelli. Is that how you spell your
yes.
pronounce? Perfect.
That's
Welcome,
correct.
Gail.
Valentine's?
Yeah.
Just be thankful for my family and make sure they know I love them.
Oh, that's perfect. Next up is Billy Taylor.
I have a school board meeting on Valentine's Day.
You'll have to post a big heart to make sure everyone's feeling the love.
Maybe some chocolate. We'll see.
Yes, that's perfect. All right, next up is Dan Lee.
So after 47 years of being married, it's always red vines on a card.
That's sweet. All right, next up looks like David Pafford.
Yes, I'm going to take my significant other to our regular board meeting.
Perfect. Looks like Emily Dean is up.
Hello, I will be in meetings Monday night.
Okay, next is Heather Jarrett.
I will be giving my family some chocolate and hoping for chocolate in return. And then I have little treats for all my students since it's a school day. And so, yeah, just a little bit of fun.
Oh, perfect. Next is Janelle. Oh, I think we did Janelle already. How about John Conan?
Good morning. Obviously, like a lot of us, we all have meetings that day. So I have meetings set so far and don't have any plans as of yet, unfortunately.
That's okay sometimes though, right? Sometimes quiet holidays are the best holidays. Did I miss anyone?
Kristen, I'm here.
Oh, hi, McCall. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to miss you.
No worries. Monday nights, I usually watch The Bachelor or Bachelorette, so I'll be doing that with all of my friends.
McCall, I love that. I do that too. All right, I think that's everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tristan, and welcome all of you again. So we'll go ahead and proceed. Please feel free, you guys, to use the chat box, throughout the session, and also, use raise your hand at any point in time. Just pop that icon up if you need to ask a question or have something you want to contribute, and Tristan will be watching that for us. So I appreciate all of your active engagement today. So our session outcomes today are to identify the themes from the informal interviews with other stakeholders about the quality schools. Thank you all so much for the work that you did in the last week to gather that information for the informal interviews. We have 62 results, so that's pretty phenomenal. So I'm really excited for you guys to kind of dig into some of that. Then we're going to finalize a field survey. We've been working on it and want to present it to you and make any final, edits or changes to that. Maybe add some questions, take any information that we might have gotten from our informal interviews that maybe we want to know more about that could help us guide maybe an additional question. And then we're going to just end with a very quick touch base on the continuous educational improvement process that's outlined in ARM. And that will be our day today. Next slide, please, Eric. So this is kind of how it's going to look. We're going to just really quickly go back and recap from when we were together on the 25th and 26th to connect our work. Then we'll go into those interviews, spend some time really digging into that. We'll finalize the field survey and then take a look at the very end at the continuous educational improvement component. We'll also spend you guys a few minutes towards the end to be sure that we are set for the following week and kind of go over a task to be completed between now and February 22nd. We will host public comment period at the end of our session from 12:45 to 1 o'clock. So we'll be sure to have everything kind of summarized up before we get into public comment. As a reminder about public comment, next slide, Eric, please. We will provide time for 3 minutes of public comment per person at the end. As task force members, we don't respond or ask questions, but really take in and listen to the public comment. Next portion, please, next slide, please, Eric.
Yeah, let me just pause there for a second, Julie. I got a message from Dan saying he's not seeing the slides. Is anyone else having trouble seeing the slide? Okay.
I'm seeing Julie all the time. Usually you see the slides, but.
Okay. I wonder if it's in a different
Maybe-
window.
I had to switch to shared content. Sorry, I must have come in outside of a panelist. I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
Not a problem. Thank you, Dan. Okay, so in terms of you guys, our norms and working agreements, we're going to focus on what matters, contribute your thinking, speak your mind and heart, listen to understand, link and connect ideas, and listen together for insights and deeper questions. This is our established consensus definition. If we were to take a vote, we would need a supermajority of 60%. In terms of quorum, we're going to have to reestablish that number in terms of what that is, because we have added some task force members. So I will go back and be sure we get that updated, if you will. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder of why we've been pulled together and what our overall purpose is, we are tasked with making recommendations for ARM Chapter 55 accreditation revisions to the Superintendent of Public Instruction and the Negotiated Rulemaking Committee. Next slide, please. There are two critical documents that we are working on as deliverables as part of our work. The first is to develop and to put out a field survey, which we want to get deployed here, and write a concept memorandum. And the memorandum contains current rule, proposed red line rule, conceptual changes and rationale for those changes that we'll be passing along to the negotiated rulemaking committee. We have talked about that we may have a portion of it going forward March 11th, and then the second portion following that in April, because we've kind of extended, if you will, our time a little bit. Next slide, please. We talked about this last time when the 25th and 26th to really kind of ground ourselves around what are the key components to these rules and those kind of four different bucket or areas. And so those are the essential elements or the standards, if you will, of quality schools. the process of how you run accreditation, the response to it, and then school improvement. Next slide, Eric. What we mean by essential elements is the what. What makes a quality school? You guys spent a lot of time digging into what this past week in your interviews of really what makes schools successful. What are those key qualities? What student performance standards are key to having a quality school? And kind of thinking about the combination between the assurance standards and the student performance standards. And so you guys kind of really dug into this bucket pretty deep, and we're going to see some of those cross themes come out here in a few minutes. Next slide, Eric. The next piece is on the how. So this is the process. How do we actually meaningfully analyze the quality of a school and determine the accreditation status? What evidence do we use? What are the criteria? What tools are a part of that process? And kind of then what's the final output, right? What comes out of that process as a description of a school's quality? Next slide is about so what. So once we have figured out what's the what of a quality school, how we determine what's the response to that, what happens with the results of the accreditation process. And so what do you do if your school cannot deliver, for example, on the insurance or student performance standards? Or how do we allow some schools flexibility to innovate while maintaining accountability for school quality? Next slide, please. And the last piece, which we'll just spend a little bit of time because we haven't quite gotten to this last fourth component, if you will, which is around school improvement. So how does the accreditation process hold schools accountable to learn and grow over time? How does it help them improve student outcomes, meet the needs of every learner? What is the criteria for school improvement? And what should the continuous improvement process be? So there's that whole piece. You go through this process and it's a cycle of defining the quality school, measuring the quality school, taking action on that. And so what? And so then it goes back again, right? You develop the school improvement process and start over again on a new cycle. So it's very much not necessarily linear as much as it is circular, you guys, as these pieces do really flow in more of a cycle. So with that, I'm going to pause for a minute and kind of then just connect us back to January 25th and 26th work sessions. And so this, let's see here, I'm going to put in the link, I'm going to put this link, if you will, into the chat box here. These are the minutes that Tristan sent out to all of you from the 25th. These are the actual minutes. And then she sent a second set for the second day on the 26th. I'm also going to place them here in the box. And so what I want you to do is I want you to take a few minutes and look those over. And when you're looking at them, I want you to be thinking about what were those big takeaways from the 25th and the 26th that you want to be sure we are bringing into the conversation today as we begin to unpack the interview results and look at our survey. So I'm going to give you, let's go 5 minutes, take a minute individually, take a look at those minutes, review them. Again, be ready to report out back to the whole group. What are those big takeaways from the 25th and 26th that you want to be sure we connect to our conversation today? Okay, I'm going to put you on the clock. 5 minutes. All right, 30 seconds to finish your thoughts and be ready to share out. Right, we're going to go ahead and I'll just call on you, and Eric is actually going to take notes for us live here on our screen so that we're able to kind of see that as we go. So thank you, Eric, so much. We much appreciate it. So I'm actually going to go to, let's see who's on my screen. Dan, Lee, you're up on my screen first. What are your takeaways from the 25th or 26th that you want to be sure we connect into our meeting today?
So I think this is going to be a theme that's going to travel with us for a while, but there's this tension about I want to use, just don't write anything down yet, okay? But it has to do with this tension about the state needs to ensure a level of quality and equity, but at the same time, local school districts need to be able to have flexibility to meet state requirements without being penalized. So and I'm not sure how to put this except the ongoing tension between the state's needs for quality and equity and a local need for an ability to be flexible. So there's this tension going on all through a number of these things to me.
Thank you, Dan. Yes. Okay. Eric, you want to go ahead and kind of capture that. Emily?
I think one thing that I noticed throughout, I think, the conversation last week and reflective in the minutes include, well, I think Dan summed it up well, but also just a reminder that, you know, we're looking at what the minimum standard is. This does not mean, you know, particularly when I was reading the materials for school improvement plans, for example, that is what we want schools to develop on an individual basis and be striving for, but there is this task force is responsible for just establishing the minimum, not what the goal is.
Thank you, Emily. All right, Janelle, over to you.
Yes. First of all, I just was going to clear up something that was in the minutes from last time that we talked about, and that was the county superintendent perhaps not being an educator and more of a clerk. I did check that out, and if that is the case, they have to hire a contractor of some kind to come in and do those teacher evaluations. So it's not somebody that's not an educator evaluating those teachers in that particular case. So I just checked that out because it didn't seem like it sounded like that's the way it should be. I think what Emily said too about the standards, this is the baseline. It's not the goal of everyone, but it is like a baseline. It's something that is the minimum standard. Talking about this is the plan for 2033, and we don't know what the world or what schools might look like in 2033. So preparing for something that is unknown. And I guess for me, what stood out just because of my position is that the standards or the arms really have different impact depending on the size of your school and where you're located, small rural schools versus other size schools, and that the standard has a big impact depending on where you are in that scenario.
Thank you, Janelle. Heather Jarrett.
Mine are fairly similar. I think, you know, part of what really stood out is the idealism of what we're striving to do, but balancing that with the realistic accountability. So I think we need to be really mindful of that. And then some of the other things that I think we just need to be really mindful about, the takeaways of our discussion are flexibilities, especially in regards to school sizes. We need to be really careful about how we go forward with that. Also, the resources available to all schools for the accountability measures, which impacts funding. I think we need to really be very mindful and critical of how that goes forward when we're talking about that big beast of accountability. And then really being careful of the how of or in the accountability based on all of that balance like Dan was talking about.
Thank you, Heather. Billy, over to you.
I just think that while we're thinking about the minimum standards, we also need to be careful and not generalize them too much, because we have so many school districts in Montana that need the flexibility to be able to meet their needs based upon their communities. And so we have to keep in mind that there needs to be flexibility within the minimum standards, which is a lot easier said than done, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Billy. Gail, even though you weren't with us on the 25th and 26th, I hope you had a chance to just kind of read the minutes, and would love to hear like what you saw in there that you're like, oh, I'd want to know more about that. So Gail?
I did read through the minutes, and so a few things that just struck me, I guess generalities, that no change is successful unless you have fidelity from everyone to the policies and procedures. And that means you have to have strong leadership. I just see these two things as necessary to move forward. It can't be just lip service. There has to be dedication and maybe just reminding people why we're in this business.
Okay. Thank you, Gail. David?
Yes, good morning, everybody. This is David. I tell you, looking back on the notes, I made a couple myself, January the 25th. I kind of like the discovery of the discussion, rather, of what a future school in Montana will look like up to 2033. And so I'm part of a task force that's going to set standards for a public school system that is right now in flux. And I don't know where the technology or the participation is going to take us. So that's going to be exciting. And then it made me go to the NWCCU evaluation handbook for the MSU. And I learned why accreditation is important and why institutions would strive for it. Because when I first got started January the 25th, as an outsider, so to speak, I was really curious about the whole process, but I'm a lot smarter now. And then I also taught myself, or by looking at this material, how important accreditation is to the taxpayer. And I discovered that in not just receiving funds, but the taxpayer is indeed entitled to believe that the institution, any of them, not just education, is investing their tax monies smartly. So I got a better picture of the value of accreditation. And then the January the 26th, I like the MTSBA survey results and can't wait for you folks to start talking about those. They were important. And then on the 26th, I sat back literally with a second cup of coffee and discovered through your discussions just how complex those accreditation standards can be, as everybody broke down some of the subchapters. So I can't wait to keep learning. And informally, just between January the 26th and February, the folks I talked to, they have no real working idea, community members in general, about the MCA, the standards, or any of that activity. They're more pragmatic. They want to make sure their kids are safe, that they can read and write, and that they're prepared to get a job when they get out. And so that's really what I'm looking forward to continuing to discuss.
Thank you, David. Over to you, Tony. Let's jump to John and we'll come back to Tony.
Thank you. Keep my video off right now. I'm having intermittent problems right now with internet, but when I read through the notes, obviously we see this fine balance between providing more flexibilities and also keeping high minimum standards, right? And that's kind of a theme throughout that we've heard from all of our, a lot of the feedback is what flexibilities are we looking at? I also need to think about, especially as a superintendent, about when we start looking at those flexibilities or anything we change with accreditation, how is that going to connect to our overall budget? Are there going to be budget implications, budget impact, fiscal impact of the decisions that we make going forward with accreditation? So those are the, and then lastly, I think just that I talked about it earlier in those notes too, about the themes, like what are we looking ahead in 10 years? What are the things that we feel like we need to, through accreditation, really think about part of that quality school? And one of the things that pop up quite a bit is that mental health aspect going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Let's try Tony again, and then after Tony to McCall. Okay, McCall, over to you.
Thanks, Julie. In reviewing the minutes, I had a lot of the same thoughts, obviously, as other people did. We spent a lot of time in talking through the actual administrative rules, which I think was a really good practice. And as Janelle said, some of the rules do have different outcomes for big and small schools based on different ratios. But with that said, we're still expected to maintain this level of quality. So I think we did a really good job of recognizing and highlighting the need for continuous local control woven throughout the administrative rules. Additionally, like highlighting the importance of those different flexibilities for schools. And I think what David said was really important too, that these administrative rules are complex and our work on this task force is really important so that we can do the best that we can to update and modernize these rules as we see possible.
Thank you, McCall. Thank you, everybody, for just kind of going back and just recentering us on kind of where were we when we left off together the last time. And just some of the things you're bringing forward, I think, are really important pieces around even the balance of maintaining quality and flexibilities. And kind of, you guys, one thing I'm just sitting with as I'm listening to you is the notion of that when sometimes we provide flexibilities, it actually means increased accountability. When you're given these flexibilities to provide that level of quality. So it's an interesting dynamic that you guys are bringing forward, highlighting. I'd like to now turn it over to Jacob and Eric to transition us into our interview responses and kind of take us from there as we look at this. And I think we're going to be able to see is, again, quite a bit around some of the things you guys are bringing up have been highlighted as themes in here. So what we had done on slide 22, thank you to each of you. We sent this out and said, hey, do some informal interviews. Just go get a sense of kind of from different stakeholders. How do they determine if a school is successful? What are the essential elements for a successful school? How should we ensure that the essential elements are in place? And then David kind of sent this last question, and I thought, I'm going to put it on here. How do we should quality standards? So those assurance standards that we have for staffing requirements, should those be related to quality? Why or why not? And so I think it was an interesting question that we did put on there and brought forward. I'm going to turn it over now to Jacob and Eric. What I will say is that Emily sent in 39 responses, and I wasn't quite sure the makeup of them. So they're just kind of over. She said they were a constituent. So I'm imagining it could be lots of different people that did respond. So when we look at those 62, maybe Emily could share with us really the makeup of that 39. But over to you, Jacob and Eric.
Sure.
Thanks, Jake. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead, Eric.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was just, go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump in at what we're looking at here in a very, very non-scientific way. We took a look at all of the responses in aggregate and tried to pull out some themes just to start our next piece of the conversation, to kind of prime your thinking pump, so to speak, as to what we saw. We did have 62 respondents, 4 did not identify. 39 did identify as a school board member, but Julie mentioned that might be a mix of different people. We had 7 superintendents or assistant superintendents, 6 principals, 3 teachers, and 2 who kind of fell in other category. There was an instructional coach and someone who was a retired educator. So the first question was, how do you determine if a school is successful? And of the 4 questions, in reviewing all the answers, I will anecdotally comment that this was where there was the most alignment, focused around student success, looking at the climate of the school, student growth, the satisfaction, and staff efficacy. And when we think about satisfaction, we're also really looking at like parent, the satisfaction of the parents and families, community members, and post-secondary readiness. For the second question, essential elements of a successful school. When we start talking about what was essential, then that's where we started to see more variation in the responses. But one key theme that really came out were certified teachers and a positive environment within the school, such that the students felt like they were there for a reason. They could see the connection to what they were learning. And then really that you could see the collaboration within the school, that everybody was heading in the same direction. Question 3, how should we ensure successful elements? How should we ensure essential elements of a successful school are in place? I will say, having been in the conversation internally with Julie and Eric about this question, I think we were thinking about what ways of monitoring should occur to sort of make sure these elements are in place. And that didn't come across in the question responses of what we meant. So I think the question was probably worded poorly. I think most of the responses were aligned to like, what does the school need in order to make sure these things are in place? So we could almost translate these responses as you look at as to what assurance standards might be in place. And the one theme that was more clear than anything else was the idea that you need highly competent, educated, and prepared staff, as well as sufficient funding to have such staff and complete the initiatives of which you're asked to do. And the fourth question was, should standards be linked to staffing requirements? Why or why not? And there was a mix of responses here. Hard to really pull out a consistent theme, but there were more yeses than nos. But most typically, someone who said yes, they should be linked had the caveat that they were essential to have these in place to help ensure we had that highly competent staff. But as has been mentioned already in the meeting today, there needs to be flexibility for a specific context of what is either happening within the world at the time. There were many comments around, currently we're in a situation where many schools across the state struggle to fill positions. And so that the requirements limit them at this point. And then also, of course, location, size of a school can be limiting in terms of having to be required to have positions that may be external to the core content areas. And so oftentimes the flexibility to fill those in a way that's most beneficial for the district is not available. So that's sort of the themes of what we saw looking at the question. And then Julie is thinking about breaking us out into some breakout rooms here to dig into these questions a little bit further. I'll let Eric jump in if you have anything else to add, and I think we can hand it back to Julie and she can give us our next direction.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. I don't think I have anything to add. I think you summarized our look at the information that we had. So Julie, if you want to talk a little bit about your hopes for the breakouts and what folks should do, I'll go ahead and pull up what we want them to think about here. And then maybe Tristan can help us.
Yeah, so we can't
breakouts.
actually do like breakout groups. So I'm gonna kind
okay.
of, yeah, but I'm gonna kind of have you think about like you're doing that. So I'm gonna assign you a number, okay? We'll number off by question. So we're gonna have 1 through 4. And so I want you to dig into the actual responses, okay? And I put in the chat, if you will, the link to the actual Excel document where all these responses are stored. And so what I'm going to want you to do is if, for example, you get question number 1, I want you to go through all of the responses for question number 1 and come back to us about what did you see, hear, notice about those themes. And Jacob's kind of given us a good, strong kind of overview of it. And then kind of what does it mean for our work? Okay. And so you'll be reporting just out on your question. So for example, there'll be 2 people with question number 1 and then 2 people with question number 2. Does that make sense? So then when you're digging in and looking at this, you're just looking at one set of responses. Questions for me on kind of the directions for that before I assign you a number.
So let's just make sure everyone sees that Julie put the link in the chat, so you'll need that.
So Julie, this is Heather. I'm not seeing that link yet. Are you just uploading it or did I miss it? I'm late, guys. I'm sorry. I've been putting out fires all morning.
No, Heather, welcome. It's really good to see you, by the way. We're glad that you're able to join us. Let me double check. Is anyone else seeing the link here for the spreadsheet?
Tristan just dropped it. Thanks, Tristan.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, any other questions before I give you your number, if you will? Okie dokie. I'm going to go with, let's go Gail, Billy, and Dan. I want you to do question number 1. David and Emily, question number 2. And then Heather, Jarrett, Janelle, and John, question number 3. And then Heather Hoyer, McCall, and Tony, question number 4.
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry, Julia.
Anybody not get their number. And then if you will, just individually, I'm going to give you about, you guys, 10 minutes of just kind of quiet time for you to dig into the responses to your assigned question, and then be able to come back and kind of share with us, right? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you noticing about these themes? What are you picking up? And then really be thinking about, what does that mean for us in our work? What does it also mean for us when we look at our survey here in a minute? Is there anything you're drawing from these responses that you're like, I want to be sure our survey also kind of goes out widespread and digs a little bit deeper into this topic? So thinking about those responses, what are those themes? What are you noticing? And kind of what does it mean for us in our work? And is there anything that you're drawing away about that we want to be sure we capture in this survey? I have right now on the clock 11:42. That means we'll come back. You can turn your cameras off until 11:52, and then we'll kind of share out on those individual responses. I will stay here and available if you have any questions on directions for me as well. All right, go ahead and begin.
Julie, I can't see question 1. This is Gail.
Gail, are you able to actually go into the Google document? Do you have a Google account?
I do. Oh, I've got it now.
Do you? Because it'd probably be easier to go that way.
Yeah, yeah, I'm using my phone and my laptop so between the two. Okay, good. I'm good. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good.
Okay, David's back, and I see he's asking for his assignment. He is looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, question 2. What are the essential elements of a successful school?
Correct. Mhm.
Okay, thanks for that. And how much time do I have?
So David, this is Julie. We will
Uh-huh.
be back whole group at 10:52. So that gives you 6 minutes to kind of look through the responses of
Okay.
question 2 and really identify kind of what are you seeing in there and kind of what does that mean for us in our work and our
Okay,
next.
thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, this is your 2-minute warning. Okay, Jacob, over to you to kind of help us debrief that activity. Thanks, Eric, for taking notes for us.
Thanks, Julie. All right. Well, group one, what were your takeaways?
I can share first. This is Billy.
Thanks, Billy. Go ahead.
So I continued to hear growth, and that growth centered around academic, SEL, and mindsets. So that was a consistent response. Also, there was some graduation, but mostly it came down to the transition success beyond high school. And then culture, and that culture was within the school, but also the mindset culture of wanting to be there.
So Billy, did your group have any thoughts on sort of what does that mean for us moving forward?
Well, I think in our sessions, I think that we've talked about how growth could be more of an emphasis within the standards, and haven't really gone beyond that thought, but we are definitely hearing that from stakeholders as well.
Thank you, group one. Much appreciated.
This
Question.
is Gail.
Go ahead,
I
Gail.
just wanted, group one, I just wanted to add a couple of things. One is I saw data-driven. My question is, or I guess my observation is most school boards don't understand what the data represents. So school boards need to be trained to interpret the data so they know what they're looking at. And then everything else Billy said, but the one thing that also has been sitting in the back of my mind is how all of this should be in the strategic plan. And that plan then should guide us all forward. So often, I think we all know that we do a strategic plan, it sits on the shelf, and then you go back 5 years and redo it. So we in Anaconda are making an effort to live by that strategic plan. Thank you.
This is Dan. I'm a little mixed up here because you're asking for group responses. Did we meet in groups? I thought we couldn't meet in groups.
Correct, Dan. We couldn't meet in groups, so we need,
Right,
so.
so we
group
need
one, so
individual
we-
responses, not group responses.
Correct. We need just
Right.
individual responses by question, if you will,
Yeah,
Dan.
he's
So
asking
it's
for-
Billy, Gail, and you for question one. So Dan, it's over to you actually for question one.
Right. So a couple things struck me, but probably post-secondary preparation. So outcome measures looking like graduation rates, ACT scores, post-secondary acceptance rates, that sort of thing. The unemployment rates. The second is this notion of school climate. It seems to be, it permeates a lot of these comments. So I'm thinking of things like safety. I'm thinking of things like support for learning, interpersonal relationships, social support, physical surroundings, administration, leadership, and professional relationships. These are just a few things. But I think this kind of builds on what Billy and Gail were talking about. So Billy talks about growth and an emphasis within the standards. And then Gail talks about a strategic plan. So I think to the extent that school districts or schools engage in a reflection or some sort of an annual reflection about what is our school climate? What are we, and addressing these various things may be a one way of thinking about every school is in a different place. Every school is different areas we want to emphasize. But what we're hoping for as a state is that each school is engaging in an ongoing planning process, looking at these dimensions. So that's kind of what I was thinking.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
All right. Question number 2. Is there anyone who focused on question number 2 who'd like to go first?
So we got David and Emily, but Jules sharing out Emily's notes. Jacob.
I'll let Eric add another slide here too quickly.
Yes, this is David. I got a
There we
couple
go,
of
David.
I got a couple of things that I saw in question number 2, and forgive me, but I didn't look at the school board members' responses. I focused primarily on non-school board members, and their responses were pretty interesting. And one of the themes that I saw coming out of those folks is I, as a board trustee, had better start recognizing the role of SEL in public education. Board trustees by design have to be rather pragmatic in their business. We have the 7 issues that we get audited on, and we have to spend the tax money properly. So that sometimes takes us away from all of the intangibles that the principals and the teachers mentioned in these responses. And I confess that there are times when I don't spend enough time on that. And just in this short a time on this task force, I think I can share that I'm beginning to get a lot more smarter about the role of SEL versus pure reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I appreciate that. So that's one of the things that got my attention in these responses. The quality school is not a factory for reading, writing, and arithmetic anymore. Participants, parents, children, and employees seem to be expecting supportive services and funding for far more than that.
Thank you, David. Appreciate your candor of new information that you're gaining. Jewel, do you want to go ahead and share the notes that you have for Emily?
Yes, I certainly will. Thank you, Jacob. The key parts to question number 2 would be flexibility, relationships, and communication delivered through quality staff, a positive school culture, which is a safe learning environment, and that there is a shared vision with with and by all stakeholders or shareholders. And an emphasis and student success for all.
Thank you, Jewel.
You are welcome.
And I'm sorry, I missed who else had this question. So our remaining person, wait a second, here we go.
Jacob,
Heather.
that was it, just 2 on this
Oh,
question.
just 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Heather, although does have question 3.
He does.
So as Eric makes his next slide, in the effort of efficiency, Heather, I'll ask you if you have anything you'd like to share first on question 3, and then we'll go to Janelle and then on to John.
Sure, I'll share. So I think some of the things that I noticed resoundingly were the level of responsibility that teachers and school leaders and administrators hold, I guess, collectively when we're talking about this overarching question. Some of the things that really came to mind for me were the retention. You know, a lot of the times in the discussion, it talked about longevity of both of those positions for teachers and leaders. So that retention piece was really important. You know, there's a resounding consensus that all of the school stakeholders need to be questioned with like school culture surveys, which is something that our school has done for quite a while. But it's interesting to me that a lot of schools don't have that as their standard operating procedure, but it sounds to me like a lot of people would really like that. And then, you know, money, of course, the funding for what needs to be happening. And then the school culture piece, along with the accountability standard piece, and then that mental health focus. And so thinking about what does that mean for our work? You know, some of the things question-wise that came to me is, first, are we asking the right questions when we're talking about accountability? Or should we be asking some different questions? So for example, a question that focuses on the retention of administrators and teachers at their schools, so that the state can start collecting that data of, okay, this school is performing at this level academically, look how long they've had the same administrators or the same teachers. And so is that an important question to be asked? Yeah. And then also, you know, when we're talking about standards, are we asking a question about what standards is each school using? Are they using just the state standards? Are they using a combination of state and national standards? So all of those things, just kind of boiling it down to, are we asking the right questions to get to the right data pieces so that we can really see school improvement over time? Sorry, that was a lengthy noticing on my part.
Oh, thank you, Heather. No such thing as too much input at this point. Janelle, please go ahead.
All right. When I was looking at this question, overwhelmingly, it seemed like people kept going back to funding, which we already noticed as one of the themes. But everything from facilities to how we keep our staff, those kind of things. So funding was the overall theme, as well as highly qualified staff, including teachers and administrators. But again, in funding and the highly qualified staff and those kind of things, it kept coming back to flexibility and how we can be flexible with our standards and still have a highly qualified staff and those kind of things. And then hiring and retaining, I think that was a big theme. If we're going to have highly qualified staff, how do we hire those people, how to retain them? still have flexibility. So it seemed to be a friction in between the how are we flexible, but also how are we meeting all the standards and the controls and having those highly qualified people. There were some things on local control, but I think overall it was the funding piece as well as how we are highly qualified. Curriculum was in there as well, but those were, not as high as the other two.
Thank you, Janelle. We'll wrap up question 3, which just for reference as we're doing this was, how do we ensure these things are in place? John, go ahead.
Janelle did a great job. I wrote down 6 different things and she hit 5 of those 6 in those issues. So the major thing I saw was funding right away. And then the ability to lead, so the leadership and having highly qualified staff. And then we can ditto most of Janelle's. The only thing that I also saw was the ability to have stakeholders take part, how they take part. That could be, that also, I guess I put that in with that whole local control piece too, but a lot of it came back to how do we engage our community, our stakeholders in making sure we have a successful school.
Thank you, John. So then as Eric finishes typing and we move on to the next question, which is related to staffing requirements in the standards. Heather Hoyer, you happen to be first on my list. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you to go first and then we'll let McCall and Tony chime in with their thoughts.
Sounds good. And thank you, Jacob, earlier. Your assessment of there being a lot of yeses, but a lot of caveats to this one is exactly what I found when I went through them all. The main themes I found were flexibility, funding, and definitely the highly qualified and its strong link to quality standards. Most people who responded to this said that yes, having staffing requirements and highly qualified staff does show a direct link to quality standards, but the question comes into play as to when a school is struggling to meet their goals, is my synopsis anyway. When they're struggling to meet their goals, they oftentimes, because of funding, have to make some difficult decisions and make some cuts, or they can't hire in strategic places to go ahead and help them meet, they either are accredited or they have high quality programs. And with staffing shortages and funding shortages, it's a tough decision they often have to make. So that's kind of what I pulled out of that.
Thank you, Heather. McCall.
Thanks, Jacob. I also had a lot of the same observations as Heather. It seemed as if there was some confusion with the question, which you had mentioned as a theme. From what I observed, a lot of the stakeholders were interested in seeing staffing requirements as it relates to highly qualified educators and have those be linked to the quality standards. Additionally, I saw that stakeholders want to see more flexibility with specific staffing ratios and variances, but also on the flip side of that, wanting to ensure that we're not creating any unfunded mandates for school districts as we potentially change some of those ratios and variances.
Tony, we can let you wrap us up on these questions. Tony may have had to step away. He is muted and does not have his camera on.
Yeah, and then Jacob, I noticed that David had his hand up. Not sure if he had a question there.
Yes, and you don't need to answer this, but by coincidence, another aspect of staffing in Montana public schools is coming to the public's attention. Dodson had 2 non-citizen teachers place illegal votes into the system, and that's getting legs. And the press is starting to hear about it, which means the public will begin to hear about it. And the number of non-US teachers in the classroom could well become an issue to community members in a very short period of time. And I'm wondering, should a quality school have a standard established by the state when they choose to or have to hire on that visa program non-US citizens.
Okay, thanks, David. So
Okay,
again,
thank you.
kind of capturing, a little bit around that there is been in recent years an increase in the number of teachers that we have that do have a visa, if you will. So thank you for that. Okay, so that kind of like sums us up with those questions.
This is
Yes?
Gail. Could I just, so that question was very interesting regarding the visa teacher. Are they not held to the same standard as far as earning their teaching credential?
So Gail, this is Julie. Yeah, I mean, I could go into much more than that, but what I would say is yes, there are requirements. They're the same kinds of requirements. They have to have, a preparation program. They have to go through all of the same pieces as anyone, if you will, that applies for licensure. So yes, to answer your question.
Okay.
And we could go into more detail with that if there were more questions about that. I'm happy to help anyone with that information offline. I'm more than willing to kind of go through what that process might be. Okay, John has his hand raised. John?
Yeah, just wanted you to be aware, Julie was part of the meeting, I think. I don't know if she heard this or if she was still on or not on our last Western Mass meeting, but there was, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but a educational leader that sent out a email to all of Western Mass asking for information back to these questions, and had some commentary in there of some in a subjective nature. And I kind of called her out on it and just said, we have a great team of people that are looking at Chapter 55 and these questions, and we are not looking at, it was insinuated that we were going to water everything down, and some other comments around that nature. And I just said, you know what, I wanted to put trust in the team, and I really thought Julie has started us off in researching and doing the best we can to help what it looks like going forward for the next 10 years. So I don't know if you heard that or not, Julie, but I did call that. It was an individual email to that person, and I also CC'd our mass president, our regional director. He didn't realize that and just called it out in front of everybody. So then I had to own it, which is, I'm okay with that, right? If I email it, I should be able to speak to it. So I had no problem with that piece of it, but I just wanted to make sure that it's out there that some of these questions, it made it look like we were trying to do away with everything in Chapter 55, and that has not been the process. And it has been transparent, to me anyway, on the website. Whoever did a great job putting that website together with all the information, people can get in there and see what we've done. So I just wanted to make that evident and aware, and kind of wanted to say
Did we lose you, John? We lost you, John, but thank you for that. Guys, it's just really critical. We've got a great team of people, and that's why you've been called to do this important work. And it matters to people, you guys. We're talking about our students and the futures of our children. So this work is important. And so we have to recognize the importance of this work. So I just appreciate the passion. And I always think that it's always good to be very transparent. So like you said, any questions that anyone has at any point in time, refer them to our website, because we're really trying to put everything up there so that we have that. I do want to transition over to our survey. So I'm going to put that, you guys, in the box, if you will, in the chat box, so that you have that link. Thank you to my colleagues over at the Region 17, Jacob and Eric, for doing so much work to kind of keep this, if you will, going and working on this survey and responding, if you will, to kind of getting it into a good draft form at the moment. So what I want you to do, I just put that in the chat box. So hopefully you can't connect right from the link, but you can from the link in the chat box. And then that's good if we have it up on the screen. Thanks, Eric. So what I want us to be thinking about right now for the next portion of our meeting here is the intention is going to be actually to send this survey out to more widespread to get a sense of just kind of what other folks think we should be considering as we go through this rule revision phase. So it's going to give us an opportunity to get more data and more information before we really start taking pen to paper on rule, if you will. So what I want us to be thinking about, and we're just going to kind of go through this together here on the screen. You certainly can be keeping track of it as well on another link, but I'd like us to be looking at these questions and saying, is there anything we need to change, edit? Do we need to keep the question, take the question away? Do we have kind of some information? Because the goal, you guys, is to send this out to gather information for you all as that working task force so that you can begin to make some recommendations. So I want to be sure we're asking the questions that you think are going to be helpful, if you will. So, and of course, we've tried to take into consideration, you guys, just like survey design on, you know, how many questions do you really want to ask? How long do you want a typical survey to take so that people can really get through it? So when we're thinking about what we've just saw in those interviews, are there things from there that we want to know more about? Does it kind of align and capture? So the first part of the survey, you guys, when we get this built and sent out, just so you know, we'll be building it here at the OPI and then getting it sent out for folks to return. And I'm shooting for a target date of, I think I put March 3rd. So the goal is to really kind of get this down to a final draft so that we can get ready to get it out and deployed here this week, if you will, so that we have as much time as possible for folks to kind of be responding. So the first question is just around roles. So I guess we hope we've captured everybody in there. So we'll go to the first question then.
Whoa, Julie.
Yeah.
So I have a question about, you have an item here, probably about 3/4 way down, resident in a rural community. And my question is, what about residents in other communities? And how does one define rural? So, you know, what does rural mean? There's ways that there's the standard statistical index of what rural is, which would be most of Montana. So I don't know why we're focusing on that particular resident over any other resident in the state of Montana.
Good point. Jacob, do you recall why that was added even? Why don't we just take it out? Why don't we take it out?
Why don't you just have a number of students in your district?
Well, but not everybody will know that, Gail. I mean, if you were, say, a parent, you may not know that, or a business leader.
How would you even get that out to a resident in a rural community?
Right. I think it's, you guys, I think what I'm hearing is, I don't think that that's going to actually give us information that we need, right? Because it's going to cause maybe more confusion than not, because it's not classified like by AA school, A, C, and even sometimes then they may not know exactly what the class of the school is. So let's go ahead. If we can, we'll take that out. Does that sound?
Yeah.
Does that sound fair, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions before we move off the roll? Thanks for calling me back on that, Dan.
Yeah, Julie, this is Gail again.
Yes.
I would be curious to see, to have retired district employee. They sometimes are a little more willing to take a stand than maybe current employees. It's just, yeah, maybe it's not important. Maybe it's just my curiosity.
do we feel like you guys, because maybe that's a good point there, Gail and Dan, if we take out resident in a rural community, do we need to put community member? Just in general?
I would say yes.
Okay, so how do
This is
we?
Gail.
how-
I would say yes too. Yeah.
Okay, okay, because I think that's kind of what you're capturing though, right? Gail, they
Well-
might fall under, they might fall under teacher, they might fall under subject matter expert. But I don't, when I'm looking at the list, I'm not sure that I see community member.
Folks, just a point of order. I think the two Heathers have their hands up, and I think we're a large enough group where maybe we need to standardize here. So if you want to speak, please raise your hand, and then we'll call you in turn. So I'm not sure which Heather was first, but on my list, I see Heather Hoyer first. So go ahead, Heather.
Mine was looking at this just from, I'm looking at it strictly from viewability from the outside in. We need to put parents / guardian of school age children, because we have people who live depending culturally, but also poverty wise, who are not parents of their children who are raising them, and they will not answer this if you don't put that on there.
Okay, thank you, Heather. The other Heather Jarrett.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate what Dan was saying as well. That was one of my highlights, is the rural community resident. I think it just does need to be a community member. That's an important stakeholder that we need to garner information from, but it's every school's community members. And then I would also reiterate the retired teacher, administrator, or district professional. I think they have valuable information because of the longevity they spent in education. I think those are stakeholders we want to hear from. And then also it says district board of trustees. I think it just needs to be a trustee. A board can't, I mean, they're not going to fill this out as a whole. They're going to fill this out as an individual. So that needs to be clarified there. And then I saw a question in the chat about what is a subject matter expert? I think that's a very good question when we're asking a person to check a box on that. I could consider myself a subject matter expert on anything in the world and click that box. So I think we need to be very careful there.
Great, thank you. Next I see Dan, and then Janelle, and then David. So go ahead, Dan. And you might be muted, Dan.
So I'm a little concerned about when we say check all that apply and how we're going to report this out. So I check off higher education faculty, subject matter expert, parent of school age children, education consultant, resident. How are you going to report that out? You can't, you're not going to say like, you're not going to count these all as one, right? So if 20 people respond and many of them have multiple identifiers, you're not going to say 66, we had 66 responses because you only had 20 responses. So I think the question is, how are you going to use these items? And if you're going to use these as you're going to say, well, subject matter experts say, well, that's maybe that's another example. Parents say, I'm not sure that we have a person checked off parent, but they also checked off school administrator. So they get 2 says. So, I think maybe instead of checking all that apply, check that applies the most, or what best describes your role. If you're going to break out these data by these groups. If you're not going to break out these data by these groups, it doesn't matter to me.
Okay, so Dan, you're saying check the one that best describes your role.
I do. Otherwise, you're going to just have a mishmash of responses.
Okay, so there was also a comment there about, well, so subject matter expert, maybe let's take that out. But I hear, because in some ways that's kind of like an educational consultant in a way, right? And it could fall under multiple. So I think it's kind of duplicated. I don't think it's going to give us what we, right? Well, because we don't even know what subject matter they're an expert in. And so if I don't know what their subject matter expertise is. So we're going to take that one off. We're going to put up at the top something like check the role that is, most describes you. And then we just had in the chat a couple things, and I don't know if Eric, there was a couple of other people, their hand up, but there's other school staff that's not represented just by a teacher or by an administrator, if you will.
Yes, and then we also have Janelle and then David.
My comment was just about the education consultant as well, just like who would that be and where are we going to send the survey to find those people? And then I also wondered about the other school staff, like your paraprofessionals and those people that they aren't represented.
Thank you, Janelle. David?
Yes. Are we curious about whether elected officials have a particular perspective that they would like to share on this survey that might be unique to their role?
Well, David, I'm wondering if that's captured under trustees, if you will.
Okay.
Okay. But like I think Heather's mentioned, I think it was Heather said, don't just do a board, just do individual trustees.
Okay.
Okay. And then it sounds like maybe educational consultant, not really maybe necessary if I'm gathering our thoughts on that. So just want to propose, can I take that one off? What do we think? Educational consultant. Anybody? Okay, I see a couple.
This is Heather Hoyer. I think it's appropriate to take the educational consultant off. It's a very small pool, I guess, in my experience. Their input is important, but they can fall under one of the other categories as well.
Okay, perfect. All right, you guys, I'm going to move to question number 1 then, so we can kind of keep moving here. Are there any we need to add? Any we need to take off? Anything you're thinking about from the informal interviews that kind of informs this?
Yes, and we do have a little bit of copy editing to do there, so our apologies for that. But David, your hand's still up. I don't know if you want to respond about question 1 or you just didn't put your hand down. I did see Heather.
No, that's okay. I put a comment in the chat. Okay.
Thank you for suggesting some alternative wording if we were to keep education consultants, but it looks like we are not. So Heather Hoyer.
Yep. So thank you. First of all, there's a typo on that first line. You've probably seen it. It should be student satisfaction.
Right.
But my question really is the audience of this question, is everybody going to truly understand what essential measures is, especially when we're asking parents to give input? I think that our Lexile level and our base of understanding, I think we need to reword this or simplify this to throw a broader net. Teachers, administrators will get it. People on this committee will get it, but I think others may struggle. It's just a concern.
Okay, did you have any thoughts, Heather, on a potential different word? I mean, you could tell I was messing with that too, because I was like, outputs,
yeah.
Right.
It might even be something like, which of the following do you think are the most important characteristics of a quality school? And so the essential measures is the thing that I'm concerned that most parents and community members who do not have a background in education outside of going to school might truly get hung up on. What is that? What does that mean? So I think it's the characteristics of a quality school that we're looking at.
Okay, we have 5 participants, Eric, with their hands up.
Yes, I think Billy was next.
Yes, I agree with Heather on the wording. The other thing is I'm from the surveys, there was commonality in the success beyond high school. And I'm not sure that student performance outcomes is really clear as to what that is. For me, I wonder, is that testing outcome? Is that success after high school? I think we need to be more clear on what student performance outcomes are to parents. I think it's another one of those language things of when we communicate it, we're putting it too much in our terms as educators, and we need to break it down more simplistic.
Thank you, Billy. Dan, I think you were next.
Yeah, so if the question is outputs, so if you think about an output, staff stability is not an output of a quality school. It might be a characteristic of a quality school, but it's certainly not an output. So I think, or family satisfaction is not an output of this quality school. I mean, the school doesn't exist to make families satisfied, right? Or educator effectiveness. So I think the question and the responses don't quite line up. So I kind of like what Heather was talking about, the quality, what kind of characteristics or quality of school is important. Well, that's a different question. But using essential measures and outputs, and then having like an essential measure is student satisfaction. I'm not sure that list works well for me.
Yeah, that's some evaluation speak there too, which a general audience is not going to be familiar with. But Julie, it sounds like with Heather's suggestion, we might simplify this and use
To
more
characteristics. And
right.
get rid of the essential measures and outputs altogether. So which of the following do you think are characteristics of a quality school? It sounds like, and then somebody put a note in there too about educator effectiveness. So I'm just noting that. I know we got a couple other hands, Eric.
Yes, I think Gail was next. And Gail, you might be muted. Oh.
Okay, I got it now. Yeah, I think I would just, where it says our essential measures, I would just put are essential in measuring school quality.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you. So again, support for simplifying that question. Okay, David, I see your, oh, it just went down. Okay. So Julie, just to summarize, so for question 1, we want to simplify the language of the question.
Mm-hmm.
We want to add post-secondary success or the equivalent. That's not quite as jargony.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Possibly we might need to modify, change some of the items so that a general audience would understand it. So maybe it's just putting in parentheses some examples of what a student performance outcome is, maybe grades,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Maybe an example of what school climate means.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think so.
And then what educator effectiveness means.
Yep, I think you got it. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the second question as we keep moving on. Thank you, guys. So,
Hey, Julie, sorry, can I jump in really quick?
Yes.
I'm just about to leave. I'm gonna make you the host, and I haven't gotten any emailed public comment at this point.
Perfect. Thank you, Tristan. We'll follow up with you later. Much
Thank
appreciated.
you, yeah.
Okay, next question was rank order the essential measures of school quality. So I think right out of the gate, we're going to need to think about maybe Gail's suggestion here, rank order the what is essential in measuring school quality? What are the ways in which we should measure school quality, the essential items? Maybe it's not the right word, is essential. Okay, up for suggestions, thoughts on this one.
And Julie, just kind of process wise, I'm just kind of looking at some of this is the fact that it'll look much simpler once it's programmed, but when you're working in Google Forms, it's not as robust. So this looks like a long slog of a survey. It doesn't necessarily have to be this way, although given the time we have, how do you best want to make use
I'd
of
like
that?
some feedback on that question, not
Okay.
necessarily on format, if you will.
Okay.
And then just knowing like if rank order matters, because I think rank order helps us. Thoughts on this question, Dan?
So one way to get at your question, Julie, is maybe if we didn't have 8 choices here, all right? Maybe if we said it's important, essential, important, not important, or I don't know, something like that, we might get an idea of what are the most important items. You know, it's knowing that one is a 5 and the other one is a 6. I don't know what we're going to do with that kind of information. So either dichotomous or maybe 3 responses, but certainly, and identify the responses. So extremely important, important, not important, you know, something like that.
Perfect. So more of a Likert scale, extremely important, not important.
Yeah,
On a
something,
continuum.
but keep it not, we don't need 8. That's too much.
Okay, so no ranking. And we'll just list them out and then ask kind of on a Likert scale, extremely important, not important.
Okay, and McCall and Heather Jarrett agree with that. So some dittos there. Gail, do you have your hand up?
I did unmute myself. Yeah, I would put like 1 most important, 6 least important, because sometimes you take these and you don't know which is a number 1 higher or in priority, or is, so if we just you know, explain that, add that little piece in there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're ready, Eric, to go to the next question. Anything on those responses, you guys, or is there anything we need to add on there? Take off? Billy?
So something that just kind of appears to me are the top 2, standardized assessment scores and then growth. You know, we've talked a lot about growth versus actual scores, and I'm wondering if those should be separated from this and seeing what our stakeholders think about scores versus growth. Just a consideration.
Okay. Are you saying, Billy, just so that I'm kind of getting an idea, do you think it almost is like a separate question?
Yes, I don't think it necessarily meshes with the other options. And I think that's a very important thing that we need to delineate, is whether we are going to focus on scores or if we're going to focus on growth.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. Next question. I'm just doing a check here, you guys, on time. Okay.
Okay.
Do we want to leave an option for list any others? Yes, no. Okay, I see. It's okay.
My hand's up, and and maybe this is just an aside. How well does this parent/guardian understand those scores when they get them home? I have a feeling they look for a grade and that's it. And I don't know where you would put that.
Okay. Okay, so thinking about the word scores, what we mean by that and what we mean by growth.
So Janelle posted a comment in the chat about a climate question relating to school quality.
Okay, did we have one up there at all?
We have school climate survey results.
So maybe we need to kind of specify that a little bit more. Dan?
Getting back to the achievement versus growth, we could just ask people how, you know, the importance of achievement tests or student growth. Keep it simple. Everybody understands those 2 comments, I think.
Right. You might have to put them in layperson's terms.
Well, I think most people know what an achievement test is, right?
Yeah.
And then most people know what their own child's growth is. So.
Okay.
Okay, good to know, you guys. All right, I see, David, I see your note. Yeah. Okay. All right, the next question then, Eric, please.
So this is about inputs,
Staffing.
right? And I'm just scrolling down for the holistic look at the survey. Okay, so they would be looking at staffing, program components.
Dan, you had a thought?
Just again, my earlier comment about the Likert scale.
Same thing. It's structured exactly the same thing as this is extremely important. This is not important at all. Gotcha.
You know, there are heat maps now you can use on these things, and that sometimes is helpful.
You're the best. Heather?
Julie and Eric, this is for you. Have we run kind of an essential, like a diagnostic on how long this will be? We've done a lot of parent surveys, as most people have, in Great Falls with a wide variety of populations, but really are, if it takes longer than 5 minutes, they're not going to do it.
Okay.
So I'm a little concerned as we go through that we just be very mindful of how long this is. Professionals will, but we may need to separate it out and simplify it. If we really want to get feedback from the public, it probably needs to be a little shorter.
Okay, good thoughts. We may need to take, you guys, all the feedback that we're gathering right now. And I think it's going to be important for you guys to try it out. I'm just checking, I'm kind of doing a time check. Do we see anybody in the, I don't see anybody that's here for public comment. Do you guys see anybody here for public comment? If I have anybody here for public comment, can you let me know just in the chat box so that I can be sure we get you guys in? I'm just doing a little bit of time check with our people. Okay, thanks. Okay, so next question then, Eric, please.
And we do have Dennis Parman who'd like
Okay,
to comment.
so Dennis, we will definitely, if you could be ready then to share your public comment at 11:45, we'll give you 3 minutes. And I'll promote you to a panelist so that you can do that. Thanks, Dennis. Okay, so next question. This is kind of the same, right? This could be one that we could really look to kind of condense and reduce the number of questions, I think.
I see Billy and Dan have their hands up. Billy?
So I'm sorry, mine is on the previous one. One other piece of information from question 1 that came from our stakeholders was the importance of our food service and custodial staff in keeping a safe environment as well. So I think that that is also something that's important to keep in mind, is the full education staff, because there definitely was comment towards that.
Okay, perfect.
And Dan?
2 items. We used your word essential quite a bit, and I think we're asking people to rate things as essential, not essential, but we tell them that they're all essential. So I think we should delete the term essential from any of these questions. Otherwise, it makes no sense to rate it. Second, I may have, it's been fast, but I don't see anything about school safety on this. And that was kind of a theme that came out in our little project we do with the Google Sheets.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Thank you. Billy, did you have your hand up?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay, no, you're good. Okay, so good to know. All right, next question. this, you guys, is about like the process of how we would measure this. So we definitely have some work to do on the question verbiage and getting out essential altogether and some of that and characteristics. But then the idea behind this, guys, this question is saying, how do we do it? Do we do any self-reflection? Schools do reflections, on-site reviews, desk monitoring, as we kind of currently, you guys do with teams, evaluation of the CSIP plans, and then thinking about what process should we use? Every school, no school, high schools, only targeted schools, or district level only, who the districts then do the school. So we have 3 comments there, and then we'll turn it over to Dennis when we finalize our last thoughts here. Heather?
Just the comment about the high schools only, because it makes it sound like we only, by just calling out high schools, they're not the only quality schools we have. So we either need to say high schools and then also do elementary, or take high schools off.
Okay.
Let's see, Dan and then Gail.
My hand was left up from the last time I put it.
Okay. And Gail?
I don't see anything on here that addresses alternative education placements, like alternative schools. I don't know if it needs to be, but in our district, I think it's an important need.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we mean by all schools, every school, high schools, get clear on that. Okay, Dan? And then I want to turn it over to Dennis.
So I'm not sure if it's necessary to drop it in all these 5 categories. We're interested in the process for checking school quality. We're interested in the process for checking ARM compliance, right? And so why would we be interested in ARM compliance with high schools only or targeted schools? I'm not sure. I think it's more of rank ordering. How important it is to get on site, how important it is to do desk reporting, so just basically, is that very helpful? And then continuous improvement plans. I'm not sure that's different than the first one, self-reflection report. For the general public, might not be able to discern the difference between the 2.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm going to, for other on this. Okay, that's good, John. I got you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis for him to be able to make some public comment for us. Hopefully, Dennis, I successfully brought you off the attendee to be able to speak.
Am I unmuted?
You are good to go.
Great, thank you. A couple of quick points. I think Dan has brought some really good perspective to this process of asking questions of the field, and along with others in terms of vocabulary being used. I think it would be wise to be very sensitive to that. I really agree with Dan's earliest comment about removing a question of rural schools. But it seems to me that you're missing an opportunity potentially if you don't ask about school size. And I think the easiest way to do that, if you're going to ask people in outside of the educational community, is you use the high school association classifications of AA, A, B, and C. They are actually based on enrollment numbers, but albeit of high schools, but it translates down. The one other group that you would have to add to that are independent elementary districts, then you would catch them all. Because it seems to me without that element, then there's this presumption that all size or one size fits all. And in fact, there's a number of rules where it says, if your enrollment is less than 125, then you can do this. Or if your enrollment is less than this number, then you can do this. And those have started to recognize those very, very small schools and the circumstances that they live under. So I would think that at least being able to disaggregate by school size would be helpful, because you're going to collect the data, and then I suspect you're going to ask questions of the data. And without that, you'll never be able to see, is there a difference between really big schools and really small schools, or is there no difference? You won't know. The other thing that I'd like to mention really quickly is, and the accreditation process as we know it for as long as I know that it's existed, when we talk about accrediting schools, anything under a high school level, in fact, you don't. And it hasn't happened because it goes, it's based on funding, in that you have high schools, and then you're going to have a 7-8 school, and then everything else is K or pre-K 6. And you have an opportunity here. And I'll go back. One of the reasons it's based on funding is because at the very end of the process, there has been the authority of the Board of Public Ed to withhold funding if schools don't comply. Never has happened, gotten close about 3 times that I'm aware of historically. And if that's not going to be the end response of the rules for someone who won't comply, district that won't comply, then you have an opportunity here to actually do it by school unit and not be fixed into that structure that's based on funding. I appreciate the opportunity to give these comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, I just want to do any last double check if there's anyone else that is here with us today to make public comment. If so, if you could put a note in the chat for me, that would be great. Okay, I do want to take a few minutes to just kind of finish up. I need to take the last 5 minutes to pull us together and take a look at next steps. So let's, can you pull that survey back up really quick, please? Okay, so then the next question was about frequency of the accreditation process. How do we feel about that? Important question.
Gail, you've had your hand up for a while.
I think it is an important question. And because, you know, if we were ever going to do site visits, we can't visit every school every year. So we have to think about how we cycle this. So, and also how much we're asking people in the field to do each year to comply with state requirements. So I think having some sense of 5 to me is a little out there, frankly, even 4, but I think within the 3 years, we could ask within every year, 2 years, 3 years, get a sense of how necessary it is to check this. I mean, things don't change all that much. I mean, it can, but generally 3 years is a reasonable amount of time for checking a school. It's month 5.
Heather?
Just back again to our audience, guys, I want to be sure that whoever is reading this, and no matter what seat they sit in, they understand that monitoring and accreditation are, in this case, we're talking about them being synonymous. And I think the public will say monitoring is just the constant keeping an eye on a school. Yeah, we should always be keeping an eye on it and not understanding the accommodation process. So it's just semantics, but I think we need to be mindful of our audience.
Okay, thank you, Heather. All right, next question, you guys. These are some like perception questions. Let's just take a really quick look to see if we should or shouldn't include these kinds of questions, if they would or would not be helpful to you. So it's kind of on a degree of low and high on a Likert scale. To what degree are the established procedures and schedules for reviewing the accreditation of each school effectively certifying school quality? These get very into kind of very legally, I guess, making rules. So thoughts on these kinds of questions? Keep them in, take them out. There's like, what do you think about the intensive assistance process? And then we did have some open-ended questions. So any final comments on that before we kind of take another shot at it, clean it up, send it back out to you guys? Keep those kinds of questions or take them out?
Julie, this is Heather Hoyer. I think they're good questions for people who are sitting in the seats and who get all that information, or they understand it. Once again, you know, looking at the audience, a lot of people will not know what it means, and we don't give them an option to say, I don't know, or I have no input. So if we're going to go 1 through 5, then you also have to say not applicable to me, or I don't understand, or not enough information for me to answer, and give them an out. Otherwise it skews the data because they'll answer low or high just to click a number. So
Yeah.
There's some dittos on that from Janelle and David.
Okay, perfect.
And then Gail, you have your hand up.
Yes, and I'm also unmuted, so we're doing well. On the one about before these, talking about how frequently, how about formal evaluation, or use that word formal, yeah, instead of monitored. How frequently should I just think schools have use the word formal evaluation? Then I think that's a little bit more clear to the public. Maybe.
And while we're on this, John also said that he actually would be okay with a 5-year period because he said some districts plan on a 5-year cycle. So this sort of continuous improvement input would be doable. Hopefully I've summarized your comment accurately, John.
All right, Eric, can you please put up the PowerPoint, click us out of the link and bring us to just very quickly slide number 33 for a second. Thank you guys. I'm going to follow up on this next steps. I'm going to give this back to Eric and Jacob, the survey, take all this feedback that we've gotten, kind of draft another version. And I'm actually going to email it out to you all. So that we can kind of be able to provide any final feedback, just check the language, make any final changes. And then I'm going to ask you to also kind of take it, if you will, and see if it works and how long it takes you. So please be looking for a follow-up from us about this particular tool, if you will, before the end of the week so that we can get that kind of finalized in a place. So I'm not going to send it out until you guys are ready for it to go out, if that makes sense. I'd rather clean it up so it's useful and take all of the feedback that we've got and give it back to you guys to have one more look at it. Are you guys okay with that? Okay. So our next session, you guys, is going to be Tuesday, February 22nd via Zoom from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Same time, same format. Next steps for us, and we'll put this in the Google site as well, for homework. This was a document that we had provided to you in the original packet, and it's also located on the Google site for you as well. But there's this document, it's called a guided question document, and it's for us to start to kind of think about which rules do we want to keep as they are, which rules do we want to remove, which rules do we maybe want to modify, and which rules maybe do we need to add or start using that are not in there. And so the best way, you guys, to kind of do that is to take a look at that Word version of the rules that we've also included as a document in the link. And that's to give you a kind of an opportunity to kind of put that side by side, just start going through the rule and getting a sense of what do we want to keep, what do we want to remove, what do we want to modify, what do we want to add, maybe that's not there. I will, even though this is a form, we're going to send you a Google link for a document as well, as like we did this last week, so that we can kind of put this all together, so that we can kind of keep that all in one place. So there'll be 2 tasks, if you will, between now and the 22nd, which will be to review that survey link, test it out. Let's get it finalized. And kind of do an assessment, if you will, an evaluation of current rules. I did include, Eric, if you just don't mind going back really quick, which hopefully you guys did have a chance, right? No, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to really, hopefully you did take a look at that article. I just wanted to not leave out this important piece around the evaluating and thinking about continuous education improvement, because it's a critical piece of accreditation, as we've talked about with the cycle. And so when you are reviewing the ARM, I do encourage you to kind of just slow down a little bit on 601 sub 3 and 4. And when you're looking at that, be looking and thinking about, this is kind of what's right in there right now about what's required for continuous improvement plans and the components in them. The article kind of talked about 12 different ways that you build a school improvement plan. So I just call your attention to, when you're looking at this for 601 and 601, being sure you do take a look at that continuous school improvement piece, because it is really important. We have a couple of comments before we close out for the day in the chat box.
Several people would like to make sure the survey touches on funding.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so got that. So next steps, we'll see you on the 22nd. You're going to get an email about this survey. Let's get it into a shape that is actually going to be a tool that is usable for you all. And then let's also take a look at ARM, and we'll send you a Google link, but it's basically those essential questions of what do we need to kind of keep, start thinking about what we need to modify. And we've got some work to do to get back to you a better draft or a better product. I just want to say thank you for all of your participation, your time, and your contribution to this process. It's just been very thought-provoking and continues to be. So thank you all for all that you do, and take care out there. You know where to find me if you need anything. That's all I have for you today. Thank you, guys.